Welcome to the Farming Your Career podcast with host Dr. Erin L. Albert, where we explore a variety of healthcare and pharmacy-related topics, including career development, healthcare IT, informatics, innovation, entrepreneurship, STEM, women's issues, and more. Farming Your Career podcast is part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and Erin has had the #1 most downloaded episodes of 2016 and 2017 of the entire Pharmacy Podcast Network. Now, here's your host, Dr. Erin L. Albert.
Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast. I'm your co-host in 2018, focused on your career development, Erin Albert. More on me over at my website, erinalbert.com. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that I keep getting asked about but know very little about. And that's about immigration issues for foreign-born pharmacists who come to the U.S. to study, either for their pharmacy degrees or for master's or doctoral programs, who then want to work in the United States. Super complex process. But we have with us today a special guest who is an expert in immigration law. And it is a very complicated area of law as well. So we are super appreciative of Dr. Jeff Papa joining us today. He's an immigration attorney with Barnes & Thornburg here in Central Indiana in Indianapolis. He's also got a fascinating career background. And prior to being with Barnes & Thornburg in the immigration practice, he served in the Indiana Senate as chief of staff and chief legal counsel for several years. He was also the inaugural mayor of the town of Zionsville, Indiana. And he actually previously was an attorney with Barnes & Thornburg as well. So he's made the full circle loop. He's also very passionate about serving from a global level and giving back at a wider level. One of his charities is called Yeti, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And also all of his interesting educational background as well. So give a listen to this. We are so appreciative. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing your knowledge with our 66,000 listeners and counting. We are chatting today with Dr. Jeff Papa, who is a connection of mine here in Indianapolis, but he has a very distinct expertise that we wanted to bring on the Pharmacy Podcast for our listeners today. So Dr. Jeff Papa, welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to focus on immigration issues when it comes to foreign-born pharmacists getting educated here in the States and then potentially staying after pharmacy school. But before we do that, my podcast always focuses on career development, and you have a very interesting career background. So can you share with our listeners how you got to where you are today?
Well, that's a very long story, but I would say it started with I sort of accidentally did an internship at the Indiana State Senate, and that's an excellent program. It leads to a lot of internships. It gives a lot of career experience, and it leads to opens a lot of other doors. And so that led to grad school, a career at the Senate, law school at night, and a lot of things that followed on after that. And then more recently, I went back and became a lawyer. I was here at Barnes & Thornburg doing immigration law. But I went back about 10 years ago to the Senate as chief of staff and chief legal counsel. So I spent about 10 years doing that. I was also the first mayor of Zionsville. And then back in July, I came back to Barnes & Thornburg to primarily do immigration law again.
Perfect. And so that's the heart of the topic that we're going to discuss today. I kept getting asked about this, and candidly, I never took immigration law in law school. I know very little about the topic. But we wanted you to come on the show specifically to discuss how to hire foreign-born pharmacy and healthcare graduate students who come to the U.S. to get educated. And so can you break down the various ways that non-citizens can be hired in the U.S. after attending U.S., in our case, schools of pharmacy or grad schools?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, from the employer perspective, you have to be careful because you can't lead with those questions because you don't want to be charged with discrimination. So you can ask questions like, are you legally able to be employed in the United States, or do you now or will you in the future need sponsorship from the employer on an immigration basis. But if you ask that, you have to ask everybody. But so assuming you're past that hurdle and you're asking about what different ways can you legally, once you've gotten there with an employee, like what are the legal ways you can move forward, I think you and I have talked just briefly about the concept of OPT, which is optional practical training. And OPT is, so if a foreign student wants to engage in work, and it has to be in their field of study, but if they want to engage in work, then there's a method to do that, and they go through their foreign student advisor, whichever university they're attending, and usually you don't need an attorney. The university can handle that, and they'll help you get authorized for optional practical training. You get an employment authorization document. It takes a while, so you need to apply in advance. And there are even two ways to do that. So you can have pre-completion OPT or post-completion OPT. You get 12 months for any degree that you complete in the United States. You can get up to 12 months of optional practical training or OPT in your field of study. And the university has to agree that it's appropriate to your field of study. So you can do some of that work before you graduate, but it subtracts from your total of 12 months. So let's say you don't use any while you're going to school and you graduate, then you're eligible for up to 12 months of OPT, which can be full-time employment in the field of study of the degree that you completed. So that would be step one.
Okay.
Then step two on the OPT, which is not applicable to traditional pharmacists. I'm sorry if I used the wrong terminology, but students who are studying pharmacy, if you're going to be a pharmacist, this second part wouldn't be directly applicable. There is after you do your 12 months, you can get up to an additional 24 months if it's a STEM degree. And I know we may argue about that, but when the Immigration Service is looking at STEM, they're talking about sort of research, development, the science side, not the applied side.
Okay.
So if they were in this field of study, but doing different things, not the applied part, but sort of studying related matters or doing informatics related to it, something like that, they might be able to get an additional 24 months on this optional practical training, which is fairly easy to arrange and you can do through your school. Like I said, it's not entirely complicated as long as you follow the rules and do what your school wants you to do in those regards. But that's very temporary. So if you then want to move to stay a little bit, so there are a couple other phases. There's another batch of non-immigrant statuses you could have once you're off OPT, or if you've used your OPT, or for whatever reason you don't want to use it. There's some other statuses. And then, of course, there's the third option, which is for the much longer term, would be is if you wanted to get permanent residency or, people say a green card. And one of the more common ways to move to that, and I think I looked yesterday and it is used in the field of pharmacy, is the H-1B.
Okay.
And that is a non-immigrant status that can be used for specialty occupations. And so basically, it's very complicated, but basically, to put it in a nutshell, is to qualify for an H-1B, it has to be a specialty occupation which requires at least a bachelor's degree, and the applicant has to have at least a bachelor's degree in that field. And that's the starting point. If you have those two things, then you may qualify for an H-1B. But those are there's a quota, and the quota is about 85,000 a year. It's about 65,000 for people who have at least a bachelor's degree, and another 20,000 who have at least a master's degree from a U.S. institution of higher education. So you're talking about a limit of 85,000 a year.
Okay.
And the quota starts with each fiscal year, October 1st. You can apply up to 6 months in advance, which means April 1st. And in recent years, on April 1st, on the first day, or around there, the Immigration Service gets about 225,000 or 250,000 petitions for those 85,000 slots. So for the entire year, they get 3 times as many applications as the quota on day one, and they do a sort of lottery or random draw. And if you're one of the ones that are kept, they process it, and if you don't make it into that, if you're in the other 2/3 of the pile, they send it back unopened. And the other reason that's important is you really have to plan ahead. So if you're a person if you're an employer who's looking at using students, coming on board in this way, or if you're a student who's looking to follow this path, you've got to sort of time all this out so that you use your OPT, and, so you've got a maximum of 12 months. You can't apply until after you've already received the degree, so you probably only have one shot, maybe two, at applying for the H-1B and making it even through that first hurdle.
So it sounds pretty complex, and I'm assuming, even though you are an attorney, it sounds like you probably would need an attorney if you're going for an H-1B after your OPT runs out.
Yeah, I don't, and again, this is not a self-interest saying, oh, gee, just go out and hire a bunch of lawyers, but if the H is very complicated, and there are a whole host of complications, and really every case is different because it really depends on what are their qualifications, what are the background, even on their nationality, because there are different approaches and different ways for some certain nationalities. So, and even not from the potential employee's perspective, but from the employer's perspective, they could get in a lot of trouble if they did it incorrectly or just get denied. So I think in the case of the OPT, you really don't need an attorney. The school can do that for you.
Okay.
The H-1B, you really probably do, unless you've got somebody in-house that really knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it seems of late that hiring managers are really shying away from hiring foreign pharmacy students or just foreign educated in the U.S. Students overall. So how or why or when, I guess is the best question, should hiring managers and companies think about going through this process to potentially hire more foreign-born candidates kind of overall in healthcare?
Yeah, well, and they have to be careful there, too, because I don't think you could you couldn't make the blanket statement, we don't hire, certain types of people or people from certain areas, but you could make the decision as an entity that we don't sponsor we don't sponsor anyone who needs immigration assistance. We just don't do that. It's not a discrimination thing. It's just, we don't want to pay for that. We don't have the resources to support that, or we've made a decision not to go that route. But if you come to it in the hiring process that you're doing that, I think there are some considerations there. The students who are on OPT, they're not subject to Medicare or Social Security taxes, but they pay all the regular income taxes. This is just a minor difference from domestic employees. But when you get to the H-1B, it's going to cost more. I was reading a blog yesterday that was sort of making the point that somehow certain chain of pharmacies was abusing the system because they have several H-1B employees. But I'm not sure how that can be because I don't know why you would do that, because it's going to cost you more than a domestic employee, because you're going to have the employer in an H-1B is responsible for paying all the costs. So there are filing fees and there are the legal fees, and you can't really pay less, because part of the H-1B process is you have to get a LCA from the U.S. Department of Labor, and as a part of that, you have to look at the particular occupation in the particular metro area and find out what is the prevailing wage, and you have to pay at least 100% of the prevailing wage.
Okay.
To get an H-1B approved. So it's not a way to undercut the labor market at all. It's, the process guarantees you have to pay at least 100% of the prevailing wages in any year.
So, of course, this isn't individual legal advice for, individual listeners here. We have to give that disclaimer, in full open forum here. But what advice generally do you have for candidates kind of in this realm to think about or think through?
Well, I think, and I alluded to it earlier, I think it's planning. Because for a lot of these categories, you're only going to get one or two shots, and you have to plan it months and months ahead in order to get that to work out, especially with your timing and your particular qualifications. But if I could back up for just 1 second on, after OPT.
Yeah.
H-1B is not the only option, and it's very specific to the individual and to the company what may work, because there are other options, but a lot of them are specific to particular nationalities or the company's corporate structure and history, or their history with the employee. So and that's another reason to consult an attorney or at least someone knowledgeable or do some research. Because one example would be is if the student happens to be from Mexico or Canada, there's a category under NAFTA called the TN visa,
Okay.
which is relatively simple to get, and it lists specific occupations. It says if you qualify as a professional under these particular occupations, you can get a TN visa and come and work in those areas. And one of the particular classifications is pharmacist. So that is a minimum requirement that you're from Mexico or Canada and you have at least a bachelor's in that area or a state or provincial license, and you can qualify for the TN visa. But again, that's restricted to those from Mexico or Canada. And there are some other situations like that for Australia, for Chile, for Singapore, but it just depends.
Okay. So it sounds like, to boil it down, it's pretty complicated at this point. I know you have personally a lot of international endeavors as well. So, the globalization of our economy and looking at different countries and getting involved in those. Can you share a little bit with our listeners how you personally get involved on a global basis with some of your nonprofit endeavors?
Oh, sure. And you've been very supportive of one of those, and that's our orphanage in Nepal. So a guy named Steve Wolf and I started a orphanage in Nepal back in 2003 with the first 10 orphans in February of 2005, and it's still going today. So we have a board of directors here in Indiana, and we as a group raised the funds to operate that orphanage every year, and we paid for the construction of the buildings, and then we try to take a group over once a year just to visit with the kids and check everything out and have a good time. And we just went over Thanksgiving for a real quick trip to see the kids, and it's just been a wonderful experience. A lot of people pitching in and a lot of good things coming from that. And that's our main source of support is our annual dinner, which will be February 12th this year, and it's sort of a dinner with speakers. We have a Skype call with the kids at the orphanage, and we do an auction and so on and have a good time. But that's February 12th here in Indianapolis, and people can see that at yetikids.org or on our Facebook page. And then, I'm involved with some other things too, with Jeff Cardwell's People Helping People's, the largest NGO in El Salvador, and it operates here in the U.S. And he does an annual trip to El Salvador to visit that, and doing great work with orphanages there and providing wheelchairs and mammograms and chemotherapy drugs, and also coordinating with the Fuller Center, David Snell, the Fuller Center, building homes for people who are living just in horrible, horrible conditions down there. So that's been a great experience too, because we've gone each of the last 3 years and we'll see an open field, and then we'll go visit people just living in the worst conditions possible. Then go back the next year and they've been moved into these new homes and their whole attitude is just completely different. It's just amazing.
How did you get interested and passionate about global issues like this and or immigration? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know. That's a good question. I grew up in some pretty stark circumstances myself, and never thought I would go much of anywhere. The first time I ever got on an airplane was to go on a study abroad trip in the Soviet Union, and I did that. Spent 5 summers in Russia and Ukraine, and did several things like that. And my grandfather came here from Italy, and I went to law school in the evening, and I said I never really wanted to be a lawyer, but if I did, it would be immigration law. And I said, well, there's no immigration law in Indiana, and that's absolutely not true. There's a lot of it going on here, a lot of good things. But in terms of leading the orphanage itself, I was on a trip in Vietnam, and I read a book called Bridge Across My Sorrows, which you can read in a couple hours, about a woman named Christina Noble, who did some amazing things in Vietnam, and she came from horrible, horrible circumstances. But that was a very inspirational book, Bridge Across My Sorrow.
Cool. Well, Jeff, how can people find you and connect with you in ways that you would like to be connected with?
Well, yeah, so the two main one would be, so if someone has a question about immigration law or just, anything else that might be of interest, they can go to www.btlaw.com and just find me there under the People tab, btlaw.com. And then if people want to find out more about the orphanage, it's gettykids.org or facebook.com/gettykids. So either route, whichever thing might be of more interest to them.
Great, and we'll link up all your links in our show notes for this episode. And I last but not least, before we get into the speed round, I have to thank you and the folks at Barnes & Thornburg this year. On behalf of Healthcare Business Women's Association, the Indiana chapter, you all have been a chapter sponsor of ours this year. We had an event at Barnes & Thornburg, and you've been super, super supportive of our endeavors. So we really do appreciate Barnes. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, glad to hear that.
Yeah. So are you ready for our speed round?
Sure.
Okay. Jeff, Papa, what books are you reading right now?
Well, I just finished 2 books sort of at the same time. I'm going to teach a legislation class at IU Bloomington next semester, so I just finished 2 great books. One was How Congress Works and Why You Should Care by former Congressman Lee Hamilton, and the other one is Keeping the Republic by Mitch Daniels, so a Democrat and a Republican, and they're both fantastic books.
I like that you're bipartisan there. What are you listening to right now?
I listen to a lot of recorded college courses from a company called The Great Courses, and they do CDs and DVDs and digital downloads of these college courses, and they're just amazing. And so 2 of those that I finished recently, I finished a biography of Churchill, and I'm watching a course on oceanography right now. Just really fascinating stuff.
And of course, we're a healthcare podcast, so if you had one word to describe the U.S. healthcare system right now, what would that word be?
Frustrating.
What's your best travel tip?
I think it would be improvise, adapt, and overcome, and observe. I think a lot of people get agitated and upset because, especially in the third world, things don't run on time or go according to schedule or go the way we think they should go, and it's not a good approach to take when you're traveling. You just got to go with the flow.
And last but not least, what's the best career advice you ever received?
I think that's probably from orientation in my Senate internship when they talked about how always be honest, don't lie about anything, help others even if there's no benefit to yourself, and because if you're not honest, it's going to come back to you. Your word is your bond, and helping others is the right thing to do, but you never know when that person may be helpful to you or somebody you care about in the future.
Well, with that, Dr. Jeff Papa, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with our listeners today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, nice talking to you.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Pharmacy Podcast focused on your career development. This is Erin Albert, and you can find out more about me over at erinalbert.com. As well, let's connect via Twitter. My handle is at Erin L. Albert. If you have questions about this highly complex area of law, don't hesitate to either reach out directly to Jeff, and he's got his contact information in our show notes, or you can connect with us as well at Pharmacy Podcast. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Farming Your Career podcast, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. If you have ideas or comments for Erin, be sure to contact her through Twitter. Follow her at Erin L. Albert. And remember to keep your career growing.